Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Danae Barkey, the Executive Director of HCU Network America, and I'm grateful for you joining us for part 3 of our clinical trial series, Clinical Trials in Motion. Tonight's session, we will hear from Dr. Sagar Vaidya and Benjamin Lewis, a person living with HCU, about what a clinical trial looks like from a clinic and patient perspective. Before we begin, we'd like to recognize our sponsor for making this series possible. Thank you to Travere Therapeutics for supporting this webinar series and helping us expand clinical trial education to our community. I'd like to hand it over to our moderator for this evening, Brittany Park. Thank you, Brittany.
Thanks, Danae. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Brittany Park, and many of you in the community already know me, so just a quick introduction. I'm the research coordinator for HCU Network America. I'm also the mom of 2 boys who were born with homocystinuria cobalamin G. So let's start. Dr. Vaidya, could you introduce yourself and your role? You've been with us a couple times in the clinical trials, but just recap everyone who you are.
Sure. No, I'm absolutely happy to, Brittany. So my name is Sagar Vaidya, and I'm a physician scientist, and I've been working in biotech for about the last 10 years, including many different rare disease therapies. Currently, I work as a consultant, and I'm help companies and patient organizations develop new therapies and advanced therapies, primarily in rare diseases and neurological diseases. I'm really delighted to be here today to talk to you guys about clinical trials and great to be on a panel with Ben.
Thanks, Sagar. We appreciate your participation throughout this the series we've done recently. So Ben, if you can just take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and why you're here tonight.
Yeah, sure. So I have classical homocystinuria, diagnosed as part of the newborn screening program. Born in Massachusetts and still live in Massachusetts today. So I was fortunate to be in a state that was testing at the time when I was born. Have been cared for with HCU since then, and adhere to a low protein diet, take formula, and take some supplements as well to try to maintain my health. See a great care team at Mass General now who helped me go through that journey. And I mean, a lot of things in life, I suppose. So I went to undergrad at a school called Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, studied business. I have a grad degree, got an MBA at another school called Babson College in the area. And I've worked either in the insurance industry or in technology since graduating. So been about 13, 14 years or so in the industry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So before we dive into tonight's topic, let's just do a quick level set. Sagar, if you could help me with this. So for the listeners who might not be aware, we're really just asking, can you describe at a high level what a clinical trial is, the variety of clinical trials, and the difference between an observational and an interventional study?
Yeah, absolutely. So clinical trials under the larger umbrella of clinical research is a critical part of science and medicine in order for us to develop new types of therapies and new types of technologies. Specifically, a clinical trial is a study that's done by doctors and scientists to understand in a controlled setting what happens to patients who have a certain condition. Now, that could be something that's quick and easy, something sometimes we call a non-interventional trial. So think of potentially doing a survey or providing a blood sample, right, for genetic testing. And these types of studies are very important because they help doctors and scientists understand more about the disease, about how it progresses, and potentially find new ways discover new ways that they may be able to develop treatments. So that is the first type of study or trial that you could say. And then more advanced, once someone has developed a treatment or, for example, a device, at that point we run an interventional clinical trial, and this is much more involved. This is where patients enroll under the supervision of a doctor, and they will try that new medicine or device for a certain length of time and the doctors will be looking for certain changes that happen over time. And depending on in that trial, of course, there's many people. So depending on what happens to the majority of them, if there's a benefit and understanding if it's safe, the drug can be moved forward to being approved and available to a larger population.
Fantastic. So switching gears here, Ben, this next question is for you. So we're grateful that you're here as someone who has participated in a trial. So not to give out any information you're not allowed to disclose. Was the trial that you participated in an observational or an interventional study?
Yeah, so I've actually participated in both observational and interventional trials. Been a part of kind of building up the data, as Sagar said, on HCU because there hasn't been a lot of specific focus on HCU and its impact on health, and sort of the data associated with it over the in the past. And then I've also taken part in an interventional trial as well. So, was part of the earlier stages of a trial where there's both a placebo. We might get into that, I think, maybe a little bit later what that means. But there's a placebo, and then there is drug going to some patients in that trial. So I've seen kind of both, and even participated more recently in surveys and things together. Again, more research on HCU and its impact on quality of life and generally what it's like to live with the condition so that researchers and folks developing the drugs can better understand, kind of what the current state is for folks living with the condition. And, then it can better identify the improvements that Sagar mentioned. And, when interventional trials are happening, they can, better track kind of movement and improvement away from that current state situation that we're in.
Absolutely. Thank you. So when you were deciding to do, either one of these, but more importantly, the interventional study, did you talk to family and friends before you decided to participate? And, how did those conversations help in your decision process?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely talked about it with family and friends. I have a sister who has HCU. My family's been very familiar and involved and also been involved with the HCU community for over my lifespan. And so we definitely had conversations as I looked at the opportunity to join the interventional trial I was part of. I also talked to friends. I have others in sort of my network that have experience with clinical trials. So I was in a fortunate position to have lots of sources of information on this and be able to access people who had experience. And so that was something I wanted to take advantage of as I made my own decision. But I think ultimately, it was one I sort of treated as my own. It was good to get the information, but you're accepting. You're sort of getting involved in something, right, that has a big impact on your life. And so for me, it was, kind of up to me to make that decision. Yeah, at the final stage, right? Do I really want to move forward with this, given all the information I've been able to get from the folks around me and also from the team running the trial? So, there was a very informative process, right, to get to the point where you make the decision to opt in and take part.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of times it's a very personal decision to be involved in these studies. So what was one thing that made you decide to consider participating in the interventional study?
Yeah, I think for me, the number one thing was that there's a chance to advance treatment for HCU, right? And we can't do that if we don't have people participating in these trials. And not everybody in the community is in a position where they can participate in a trial for various reasons. And, I was in a spot, after having those conversations and getting all the information and thinking about it where I, just given my lifestyle and my health as relates to other conditions, that I have, all the kind of pieces were in place where I thought I could participate and contribute to furthering the treatment. Without participation, the process can't move forward. So I thought it was, important to take part in that and play a role in helping a company move a drug, hopefully, to market.
Fantastic. Thank you. So before we keep going, let's take another step back. Let's talk about the phases of the clinical trials. So based on the overview that Sagar just had given us, it seems like there are differences that impact you as a clinician and researcher and the patient as well. So Sagar, what are the typical phases and what kinds of questions do different phases aim to answer in a clinical trial?
So, absolutely, it's very important when you're thinking about a clinical trial, as you just heard from Ben, it's a tough decision. There's a lot of information to process, and so it's really important to know what stage of development your trial is in. So generally, we talk about three stages: phase one, phase two, and phase three. That's the traditional drug development. Phase one is a very small trial, something probably you will never participate in. It's generally done in healthy volunteers, and it's the first step to really understanding, what are the drug levels in the body, what is the initial safety. Sometimes it can be just one dose or maybe just a few doses. It's a very short study, really to understand, should we move forward with this type of drug. Now, from there, if those studies are successful, they move forward to phase two. In phase two, this is a larger study, but now looking at the people who have the condition that they're studying in the trial, and now looking for whether or not that drug or treatment is working. So it's the first real evidence of whether or not we expect a drug to work for people with that condition. Of course, the drug or treatment has usually been tested in animals, but of course, that's not the same thing. The phase two also importantly gives us very important information about safety of the drug. Those are things that we learn from other experiments as well, and I know we're going to get into that in a few minutes. But it really establishes that early safety profile. Now, from there, if those experiments are successful, a company, before moving to a phase three, at that point, really needs to think about whether or not this drug can get approved and will be approved, and because it's a humongous investment for them to move forward into phase three. So phase three is a very large study. Often it can be all across the country, all across the world, and very, very expensive. So the company will only go forward with this if they feel confident that this is a drug that really has a benefit for the patients, has a good safety profile, and they think that, of course, they can get reimbursed for the drug, that patients will take the drug. So those are the three phases, and in phase three, after phase three, often the drug can be approved. Now, in rare diseases, specifically talking about homocystinuria, some of the treatments, right, cannot be given to healthy volunteers. They would be dangerous. So for that reason, phase one and phase two is combined. So people who enter those types of trials, uh, they'll be learning the earliest, of how the drug works, but then they'll also be looking for whether or not the drug works over a period of time.
Great, fantastic. Thank you for that overview. So back to Ben, this question's for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey when you were participating in the clinical trial? And specifically, what did your visit to the trial site involve?
Yeah, so I mean, at the time that I participated, I was in the trial for a number of years because it was a combined phase one, two, right? So they needed to get a little bit more uh, data. They were trying to go through all the different steps that Sagar talked about for those two phases. And so yeah, I had both uh parts of my experience where I had to go to a trial site, and then I had parts of my experience that involved at-home visits. And so going to the trial site, for me, I live about an hour outside of Boston. At the time I lived a little bit closer, but I would go in. In my case, I'd either already maybe be in there because I was working that day, or I would commute into the city by train, or so, one of the normal ways I'd get in, go to the trial site. And then at least in this location, there's a specific clinical trial unit. So there's a specialized division, department of the hospital that takes care of clinical trials for drug companies that are testing out these different treatments. So I go there, met with a fantastic care team. There's a coordinator on site who sort of makes sure that everything goes well, sort of shepherds you through the whole process. And then there are the nurses, RNs, doctors, and others who sort of administer the treatment, take labs and measurements and things like that. And I guess it changed over time, right? Again, not only did the fact that I went into a site and then also had at-home visits, not only did that change, but also the activities at the visits would change, and they changed over the long term. So the beginning of the trial looked different than kind of where the endpoint was for me, but and they also changed on sort of a regular scheduler cadence. So every third visit would involve a certain set of activities. Every annual visit, you would maybe have more done so that there'd be more more data to capture at that point. So you should expect that it's not going to be the same every time you go in. But I will say, when you sign up for a trial, that none of this is a surprise. There's a large stack of papers you will go through, word by word with the primary investigator, the doctor on site who is sort of administering the trial. And in that document, there is a lot of information on the schedule, the kind of overall schedule, and then this sort of cadence or repetition you're going to go through, and what sort of tests you're going to be getting on day one, what tests will happen annually, what tests will happen every week or month or whatever it might be. So you won't you won't be surprised at any point from day one on by what's happening. You really should know that right away. And yeah, I mean, for the interventional trial, you go in, I'm trying to think, it's been a little while, but you go and you get dosed typically, and then you might be there for an observational period, maybe an hour or so, just to make sure there are no side effects, and then they might take some measurements, or vice versa. They might take measurements and then they may dose you, have an observational period, just again to make sure that there's no immediate side effects, and then you could go on your way. The at-home visits were similar, right? But in that case, you're having a nurse come to your home. They have to set up some equipment, and they go through the same process. They might take some labs. They might dose you and observe you for a little bit. That was so part of the reason that happened, right, is I was participating during the pandemic, and so we were kind of building a plane and flying it at the same time a little bit. So my experience there varied a little bit. Some of those visits were perfectly fine. Some, had areas of improvement. But I think the good part is that since that was a little bit of a novelty at the time, there's a lot of communication with the folks at the site. Even though I wasn't going to see them, they were still coordinating that treatment and sort of the service I was getting from the nurses. And also, communication, from those folks at the site up to the drug company to make sure that, we were improving on that sort of patient experience as part of the at-home visit. So yeah, it's hard to say there's one answer. I think things will look different, especially as you go through the phases and the scale of the trial grows, right? Like, they're not going to be able to find people who all live right near a trial site. And so I think you can expect that, especially as you get into phase 3 and you're talking about like a nationwide or maybe even a global trial, that might involve more at home or sort of remote care versus the earlier stages. Also fits with the type of sort of safety and confidence level that the drug company has, right? In the earlier phases, you're going to want more oversight, and as you get into later phases, you can kind of have a more distributed approach. So yeah, so I think people should expect different experiences, but I think the real key is that while I can't describe the experience you'll have when you join the trial, because yours will probably be different, you will know with 100% sort of certainty from even before day one what it will look like, because that will all be laid out in a very detailed way.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to know. Absolutely. Was there any part of that process that surprised you or that you didn't expect?
Not really. I mean, things can all look different. All the different trials or these sort of activities can look different depending on the phase, the type of treatment, the condition it's targeting. But at the end of the day, I think it probably boils down to some pretty standard things. You if it's interventional, right, you're going to be dosed with, some sort of treatment. Now, again, in the earlier phases, in a phase one or phase 1, 2, and sorry, can keep me honest,
Yeah.
you might be dosed with a placebo, which is basically an inactive treatment. So it's not actually providing you the drug or the treatment that the company is intending to commercialize. Or you might be getting the drug. I mean, yeah. So they're blinded studies. You could be involved in a blinded study, but you generally would go and you would get dosed because they're going through the same motions, regardless of whether it's the drug or it's the placebo. And then you're having measurements taken. So you're probably just getting a concentrated version of the same things you get at your annual specialist visit, or if you go in for a particular symptom you're experiencing. Well, blood labs, DEXA scans for bone density, echocardiograms, things like that. So nothing really out of the ordinary. It's just a more sort of, again, concentrated version, and you're doing that much more frequently probably than you would otherwise, which again is kind of a nice thing for us in the HCU community, right? Because there hasn't historically been a lot of data on the condition. Now these drug companies, almost a side effect, I guess, if you will, of these interventional studies, is they're also getting a lot of really, I assume, very interesting data on just how HCU impacts folks, and how homocysteine levels change over time on a more frequent basis than we've seen before. So yeah, I think yeah, don't nothing should be totally shocking. Probably not even a lot of new activities in there. But just more frequent, and you might be doing more of these things in one visit. Every time you go on into the site, or have someone come to your home.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. And Sagar, can you tell us how researchers determine whether a trial is safe to conduct?
Yeah, absolutely. So safety is the number one most important concern in any clinical trial or any clinical program. Because, of course, if a drug has very significant side effects or a treatment has side effects, doesn't really matter what the benefit is because nobody wants the side effects. An extensive amount of research is done on any treatment even before coming to clinical trials. Often that's tested in a lab. It can be tested in animals using computer algorithms. Oftentimes, drugs are of a certain class of molecules. And so that class of molecules, for example, in rare diseases, often we use something called enzyme replacement therapy, or ERT, when an enzyme is missing. And so we know kind of the safety profile of that class of molecules. So that gives us a good kind of starting point when we start these clinical trials. But of course, we don't know the safety of the drug, and that's one of the reasons we are doing the trial, is so that by the end of these trials, we should really understand what is whether the drug is safe, what are the side effects, and most importantly, how can we avoid those side effects? If you think about it, there's a lot of drugs out there today that we take on a regular basis, but because we know how to use them, we can avoid any dangerous side effects from those types of drugs. So like that, in the trial, the patients are monitored very closely by the doctor. As Ben mentioned, it's a concentrated experience, and all of that is collected. In addition, before the trial even starts, it has to be reviewed by the FDA, and they have certain standards for what safety is required. And then it undergoes another review by the local hospital, often known as an ethics board or institutional review board, IRB, where the physicians in the hospital and scientists all look and say, okay, do we think that they're doing this ethically? Are they addressing all the potential risks? Are they making sure they're watching the patients for the certain risks? And more than that, is there anything in here that's unnecessary, right? Is there any unnecessary risk to the patient? Anything that should be in this trial really has to be critical for getting the end answer. Anything extraneous should be taken out completely. We don't want to have any additional risks. So moving through phase 1, 2, that really gives us a lot of information. And that really prepares us for phase three. And when you get to phase three, the nice part is now the researchers, the doctors, they already kind of know what the effects are in humans. It's usually treated several patients for a good amount of time. And now it's really now phase three. Remember, humans, we're all different, right? And what might be a reaction in one person won't be a reaction in another. So that's where phase three, we need to get a larger population to see if could there be a rare side effect, for example, before we let it loose into society and now everyone prescribe it. So like that, there's many guardrails for safety alongside as the development occurs. And just remember also that these trials are incredibly expensive. Okay, even before trials start, companies may have spent tens of $1 million. Phase three trials can cost upwards of $100 million. And these companies are only doing this investment because they think at the end, patients will want to take the medicine. And so, of course, they're not going to be spending the money on drugs which they think have significant side effects, right? Because in the end, they wouldn't be able to make their money. So we generally focus only on drugs that have minimal side effects and benefits that are beyond what is currently in the existing treatment.
Okay, fantastic. And to build on that,
Brittany,
but
one thing I might quickly add, if you don't
please
mind,
do.
is
Please.
I think it's really easy as a patient to look at this opportunity and think that you're going to be going to do something that's completely brand new, sort of never before seen. And back to some of the earlier points that Sagar just made, like there's a whole process to get to the point where they're starting a human trial, even if it's a phase 1, 2, right? Like a lot has happened to get there. And I think the other thing is like the the sort of pieces of the puzzle, a lot of them tend not to be brand new, never before seen things, right? Sagar mentioned the molecules and ERT, therapies. Like that's something that's been used for other conditions. We're now applying that concept, that sort of mechanism to HCU. Yeah, it needs to be trialed for HCU. The specific, makeup of that treatment needs to be trialed for HCU, but the concept of ERT, type treatments that they've been around, they've been used in other cases. Even like the drug delivery methods, right? Like, you might be taking something orally, maybe you're getting an injection. A lot of those methods have been used for other conditions, right? So I think it's probably, I think it's just an important reminder, having gone through this, that it's easy to sort of have I think a nervousness or an apprehension that like you're going to do something that it's never been done before. But in reality, like while HCU has not seen some of these treatments in the past, they've been used to treat other conditions, and scientists are now looking at how they can apply those sort of pieces of the puzzle to help out folks in this community.
Great. No, thank you for adding that. I appreciate you adding that point for sure. So Sagar, to build kind of on discussion of safety, before we even get to the clinical trial itself, so how do researchers decide which treatments or strategies to even test?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And sometimes it's due to research that's done as we talked about, the non-interventional research, right? Like things that Ben that you participated in, right? That gave information to researchers, new information, so they may come up with new ideas. Sometimes it may be just serendipitous, that somebody just did an experiment and they thought of something, and they came up with something like this. Sometimes it could be an adaptation, like what Ben was talking about with the enzyme replacement therapy. We know it's being used for other diseases. For example, PKU, which is a very similar disease, uses an enzyme replacement therapy. So now, can we adapt that process to HCU? Now, there's a lot of work that's done before clinical trials start. It's really important to understand, to make sure that this drug is working. If it's a biologic, sometimes you have to tweak it a little bit, change it a little bit so it does a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that. Maybe it doesn't clump together. You got to know biochemistry. Often we test it in animals. and to understand, to make sure that the drug is actually working. And then also a big part of it is knowing the dose. Figuring out the dose to give humans is one of the biggest important things because we only have one shot at these trials, right? Now, any drug, if you give too much of it, is going to cause side effects. If you give too little of it, you're not going to see the effect. So getting that dose right, that's something that we really spend a lot of time on, energy on, in that we call preclinical space before human trials. And then finally, before we actually go to the human trial, there's a critical step which is called, well, there's the medical term for it is called toxicology. But what it means is we take animals and we give them high doses of the drug to see if there's any side effects in any of the organs. We do that for a long period of time, look at all the organs to be just absolutely 100% sure that if there is some safety, let's know about it before we go to the human trials. And if it's something that we know about, can we prepare, for that in the human trial? Say we think that, oh, this drug might affect the liver, right? Maybe some drugs affect the liver. So in that trial, we're going to be checking their liver tests on a frequent basis. So those types of things really inform the clinical trial. But what I'll say is very, very few drugs actually make it to clinical trials. Maybe less than 1%. Because people come up with a lot of ideas, but they have to make it through all these hurdles, right? The drug has to work, it has to be safe, the company has to have enough money to move it forward, and usually you don't have those pieces. If you do, and you make it forward to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, now you know that that is really something special that really potentially could benefit societies substantially.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Ben, so following your participation in your clinical trial experience, what kind of check-ins or assessments were part of your participation?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's at least two parts to that. One is qualifying for the trial. So, I mean, patients need to make their decision as to whether they want to join. But they also, there are sort of qualification characteristics, right, that you need to satisfy or sort of meet up against, right, to be part of a trial. And so, that would, there's sort of an initial screening that they do to determine that. And again, it was a lot of the tests I listed off earlier, for at least for the HCU community and the types of trials we'll be going through. So, blood lab results on homocysteine and other amino acids and other sort of key indicators, that you can get from those labs. DEXA scans to get a baseline on bone density, echocardiograms to understand your heart health. And then, an eye exam because we know folks with HCU sometimes have issues with their eyes. So yeah, there's a lot of that up front to screen you to sort of say that you qualify for the trial. And I assume that will change, right, depending on whether it's phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. One, I guess, as Sagar said, would be healthy individuals who aren't affected. But, if you're an affected individual going into a phase 2, they still, I think, want you to be fairly healthy because you need to sort of go through this treatment process and they need to get clean data. And then, during the trial itself, I guess that's the other big piece. Again, you would have regular visits on some schedule, maybe once a month, maybe 4 times a year, once a quarter, maybe annually, where you would have basically kind of like a deep dive into all of those indicators of your health and how they might be changing because of the treatment. So, you maybe 4 times a year, annually, you would have the full eye exam. You probably be in the hospital, your site, the trial site for a day potentially. Eye exam and DEXA and blood lab. You know, Cognitive tests, that's one I've left out. So there's a battery of sort of cognitive tests, memory tests that they put the patients through in my experience. And so like all that will happen, the full menu, you'll go through the full menu, maybe at least once a year. And then, on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, when you're going in more frequently, you'll only do a small subset of those things. Maybe primarily focused on the labs and those results. Maybe the sort of cognitive and memory tests will be done regularly. But a lot of those other bigger things will, again, happen less frequently. Those are kind of the two things as far as kind of what I experienced getting screened to join and then taking part in the trial. I think we might get more into this later, but as a patient, you need to think about your ability to kind of meet those demands, right? And the impact that will have on your life. So I think it's less about sort of what you're going through as you're part of the trial, but I think it's the actual activities you'll experience. But I think it's also important for patients to think about their ability to be a reliable trial participant, and and how they'll be able to fit that into their life, into their schedule, because obviously you need to be able to sort of meet these obligations and participate in this for a solid period of time. It could be months, could be years, depending on what phase you're talking about and sort of the level of complexity of the trial.
Fantastic. So just as we're wrapping up here, you brought up a great point in your last comment, Ben. So I was going to kind of put it out there as, what advice would you give to a patient or a parent of a minor child if they're considering joining a clinical trial? And how do you approach your clinic, about this interest and in getting started? Both of you can answer that question.
Yeah, sure. I think the advice that I would give is, I think these things are well worth participating in. I mean, it's a big decision, and again, it's everybody's own decision to make. But I think it's easy to fall into the mindset that this is very novel. There are a lot of there's a sort of a high degree of risk involved, that that there's a lot of downsides maybe to doing this. But I think there's a lot of things that I think negate those perceived downsides, and there's benefits here, right? One benefit is you get to be a part of furthering the treatment. The other thing is if the treatment works, and as Sagar said, for it to get to this point, it's already pretty promising. But if the treatment works and the trials continue and move on to 1, 2, and 3, you've sort of gotten an early seat at the table to get onto the treatment. Because at some point, even if you start in a trial early on and you're part of the blinded trial, you might be on a placebo. There is a point, right, where the trials transition so that it's open label, i.e., all patients are getting drug. And so that's another kind of benefit potentially, is you get to be at the front of the line to get this treatment that we see as certainly as promising, and likely as something that can have a positive impact on HCU, on a condition. I think that's kind of the big, I don't know, kind of North Star or benefit upside piece of it. As far as negating those perceived downsides, I mean, one, we've, like Sagar's already talked quite a bit about things related to safety, and the fact that the risk level here has been analyzed sort of heavily to get to the point where the treatment's going to be going into a human trial. And then I think for me, one of the biggest factors was the scheduling. When it was when the arrangements were such that I had to go to a trial site, fitting that into my lifestyle. Those things can be challenging, right? You need to think about, again, being able to show up on a regular basis, or have someone, maybe visit your home on a regular basis, and how you can fit that into your daily schedule. The good news is, again, like the people who are guiding you and sort of overseeing this process are all, in my experience, like absolutely phenomenal. Have you and your well-being as their number one concern. And so while that can be, there's a balancing act you have to kind of go through there to fit this into your life, and some scheduling you need to think about. Everyone involved is all ears for feedback, and they take it to heart and really act on it, because you're the sort of core piece of this picture, right? They need to make sure you stay participating, you have a good experience, and you're well taken care of. And I think that in a way, actually, that I'll just add quickly that's maybe another benefit you get to work with, so to speak. Some really fantastic people. The folks at Boston Children's where I went, were the team was just absolutely phenomenal. Some of the best medical professionals I've come across. So yeah, that was kind of a nice part, and you get to know them quite well. So that's kind of nice too, given they're already pretty good people.
Absolutely. And Sagar, if you have anything to add for that same
Yeah, I mean,
question.
before we end though, do you want me to talk at all about placebos, why we use them in clinical trials? Would that be helpful?
Sure, absolutely.
Because I know, Ben, you had talked about it a little bit, and this comes up quite often. So in a clinical trial, the doctors are trying to understand whether the treatment has a certain effect. Now, when people enter a clinical trial, as Ben mentioned, life changes in some ways, right? You're more aware of your condition, you're being seen by doctors a lot more, and so it's not exactly as the same as when you were not in a clinical trial. And even you may even feel better. You may feel like uh, things are better. Maybe my homocysteine level is lower, or maybe some other aspect of the drug is benefiting you. Now that is a well-known a thing called the placebo effect. And it's known that humans, when we get into a certain situation, we start taking treatments, and we're optimists, and we think that we're going to be feeling better. But the job of the doctors is to be absolutely sure that that is due to the medicine and not to you just participating in the trial. Because it would be terrible if, you felt better, the drug didn't do anything, and now the drug's approved and maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of people are taking this medicine that's really not benefiting them. And so for that reason, um, there's this huge amount of work that's put into the phase three and the earlier stages as well to really understand do the people who get the drug, is that different from placebo, or sometimes they don't give placebo, they just give nothing, and that's just called untreated control. Now, what you should know that when you come into a trial, there's a chance you'll get placebo, but hopefully the company should, and most companies do, allow those patients who participate, if they got placebo, they can get the drug afterwards. And that's usually called something called an open label study, where all the participants get the drug. And this is so the company can study kind of long term when people are on the drug for a long time, how do they feel? Is there any safety risks? So for that reason, unfortunately, placebos are required in most clinical trials.
Great. I appreciate that
Yeah, no
clarification for sure.
problem.
Because obviously, if you're a part of a clinical trial, you want to be make a difference. And even if you're getting the treatment or the placebo, those are all, both very integral parts of the trial,
Exactly.
regardless. So thank
Exactly.
you both for all of your answers and your knowledge and talking about clinical trials, and Ben, your participation. It's great to hear straight from a patient how it might have gone. So I'm going to turn the time back over to Danae. She's going to go through the questions and answers that have been submitted by our participants um, for the time we have left.
Thank you, Brittany, Sagar, and Ben. As Brittany said, we'll move into the Q&A. If you have additional questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A. And so, Ben, there's a few questions here, and I'm going to maybe reframe them because they're in. So, when you were in the clinical trial, did you have to change anything in terms of your treatment, or what was the expectation for you in the low protein diet and medical formula? I know this is something all the patients are curious about. I think there's some misunderstandings too around this topic. So if you could kind of talk about what that looked like for you, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, and it's a good, I guess, follow on to that last conversation that where Sagar just provided some information on placebo and sort of the parameters of a trial. I mean, I guess I want to provide two parts to my answer. One is, so you as the participant and the folks running the trial, so the intentional side of it, so to speak, everybody intends to kind of keep all those different variables fixed, right? So, partly this comes from my experience. I think partly this would just apply to a lot of the trials that HCU patients might participate in. As Sagar said, it would create a lot of sort of noise and uncertainty if patients came into a trial and started changing all these different things in their life. Maybe they're trying to change their diet, maybe they're changing other treatments they're taking. And so I think the sort of easy and simple side of this intentional piece, so to speak, is that everybody intends for the patients, the participants, to try to keep all those things that they've been doing in the past fixed throughout, pretty much all or most of the trial. Certainly not until you're told otherwise. And the other thing I would add to that is that a lot of that information will be captured as part of the trial too. So, because another thing I left off another piece of data I left off that would be captured, I'm sure, in almost every HCU trial is a diet record. So they'll want to keep track of the food you're eating, and they will note, I'm sure, when you're starting to deviate from your normal diet. The answer, I think the short answer is no. Generally, you're not going to be changing those other things in a trial because, again, the point is to test this treatment. You don't want to start kind of testing, so to speak, other changes in how you treat HCU. Unintentionally or subconsciously, there is this, I think, sort of desire, this habit, as Sagar sort of alluded to, where people are in a trial, and that does sort of, even if you try to be unbiased, that sort of might influence your behavior. And so, I think people probably do evolve a little bit when they're in a trial, but you do have to be, again, careful and sort of try to be mindful of the fact that ultimately the idea here is we're testing this treatment that you're receiving as a trial participant. We're not trying to test, unless that's the point of the trial, right? We're not trying to test changes to your diet, changes to your other treatments that you've been prescribed by your doctor.
Yeah,
Thank
maybe
you.
I'm just going to add to that, Danae. I mean, this is an
Yeah.
incredibly important point, right? Because in the end, the doctors have to be able to understand whether the treatment was better than the placebo treatment. And so if people come and they change their diets or they change their medications, for example, that could very much significantly affect the results in the middle of the trial that has nothing to do with the treatment, right? And then the doctors would have all this confusing data at the end, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So for us to have the best chance of understanding whether the treatment works, and if the treatment works, to get it out to everybody, it's important that patients remain generally on a stable diet, whatever they started, whether it was high protein or low protein, um, if they're on betaine, if they're on other types of treatments. And importantly, I think people should understand there's no judgment here in terms of what people should be compliant with or should not be compliant with. I mean, Ben, hopefully you got that experience when you went to the site that really these are physicians and study staff that are so dedicated to clinical trials, and they're really putting the extra effort in here for the opportunity to be able to progress this therapy.
And actually, that's a good point. One other quick thing I'll add is it's probably important for patients to know that there tends to be a wall between the data that's captured in the trial and data and information that's captured in the trial, the data and information that you might provide your care team. And so, I think it's just another thing to keep in mind as far as having a comfort sharing that information. I hope you have comfort sharing it with both, but just know that in the trial, that all that information is kind of kept contained within the trial, unless there's some clear sort of safety or health concern. Then I think there's a process for that to get shared. But that information stays contained within the trial, and as Sagar just said, like it's in everybody's best interest that the information you provide be accurate, and they're really, the team will make you feel very comfortable being open and honest about kind of your lifestyle, your diet, your things like that, because because yeah, I think they understand everybody's human, and they also understand that it's important to just know where you're at so that they can account for those things when they're trying to measure the effectiveness of the treatment.
Thank you. I think honesty is one of those conversations every dietitian, every geneticist, everyone in the clinic has so often. And I think really when it comes to a clinical trial, it becomes that much more important because it's, they can't provide their best care. You can't get the best potential outcomes of a clinical trial without everyone being honest and on the same page. And so that starts with, unfortunately, our diet logs in most cases for our patients. There's a couple more questions here. And I think this one is a quick one here. Is so when you were in the clinical trial, and I think this is again goes back to what we were just discussing here. One second, I hit the wrong button. Is there any data on how much extra protein the drug will allow you to have, or were you allowed to have more protein as part of the trial? I know every patient's dream is to eventually not have a low protein diet and medical formula. Was it your experience in the trial you were in that got to change at all at any point, or what did that actually, what was the outcome that they were looking for really?
Yeah, not in my experience. I mean, I can't say that there won't be trials where maybe that happens at a certain phase, but no, not in my experience. I kept the same diet that I had when I came in throughout the time in the trial, and and again, we're capturing diet records every time I go in every 1 or 2 weeks, whatever it was, and so there's very frequent data on your diet and the fact that you're supposed to try to keep it pretty much fixed in terms specifically right for us in terms of protein intake. I mean, the dietitians I think are capturing other things around the nutritional things that you're taking in through food, but the main thing is keeping protein within sort of a fixed range. I don't know. I think I think the goal of these treatments, right, in general, is to enable HCU patients to live, with more flexibility around their diet, maybe with fewer of the other treatments we take. But that I don't have an answer, and I think that will vary depending on the treatment. The fortunate thing is, I think we're getting to the point. I guess we'll hear more in July in Philadelphia. That there's maybe multiple trials that will start to happen. There are multiple types of treatments that are being tested. That might be approaching the point where they could be trialed. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that answer is going to differ depending on those treatments, and so the level they're trying to achieve, in terms of impacting HCU and its effect on us.
Yeah.
Danae, let me just add something there. So as we talked about for the treatment, to understand the treatment, if the treatment is working, there should be no changing of protein, right? The protein should be relatively consistent. But of course, the drug hopefully in the future would allow some patients to eat more protein. I mean, that's the reason that it's being developed with all of the patients in mind and understanding that that's the primary concern of that people have, or the primary inconvenience quality of life issue. And so it's only a short period of time that this trial is going on that everything would be stable. But should the drug be successful, be working, and move forward into either being approved or to do, additional studies, of course, there would be additional trials to understand, how much protein might you be able to add and still keep your homocysteine levels at a reasonable level. So it's kind of not yet in terms of the protein, but the hope is in the future, after the trial's finished, there may be an opportunity for that.
Thank you. Um, Sagar, this is more of a question for you.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the landscape currently of what clinical trials are currently taking place for classical homocystinuria?
Well, I would say that the most advanced therapy that's currently there is being developed by Travere Therapeutics. It's called pegtibatinase, and it's being tested in a phase 3 study shortly, soon to be tested in a phase 3 study. Um, Other than that, I believe there are some earlier studies on, I think, formate that are going on in Australia, but I haven't seen a lot of data on those, to be honest with you. I know there were some additional companies that were trying to develop a kind of a pill that you would take, either an enzyme that would digest methionine or a bacteria. But I think that, as I said, not many treatments really make it past that, and so some of those treatments have had results that have been challenging. So I'm not really aware of anything that's as far along in clinical trials. I know there are a lot of very exciting earlier stage research that's being done with gene therapy and potential ways to have the body produce the enzyme instead of having to give it externally. But as far as clinical trials, really in the classical homocystinuria space, I'm aware of only one advanced therapy that's advanced.
Thank you. And that's my call to join us in Philadelphia this summer in July, to get a better understanding of the landscape and all the emerging therapies, to those who are listening. I'm going to do one more question here and close out. But to those who are on the fence, about joining due to fear, what advice would you give to them, given the little bit of landscape analysis that Sagar has provided? Ben, what would be your advice?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it gets back to the fact that there's a whole system, many people, lots of money, that is dedicated to ensuring the safety of the trial and to ensuring your health throughout it. And so yeah, I don't for me I didn't think there was much to be afraid of, maybe as others do. I mean, I decided to go ahead with it, right? But I think that's important to remember is like it's easy to again, I think it's easy to look at this as novel, as experimental, as sort of untested, untried. But I mean, again, there's a huge system that is laser focused on ensuring that the process is safe and that your health is maintained. I would say the other interesting thing that's a little bit of a benefit, you won't get a lot of insight into the data from from the testing that's done in the trial, but everybody in that system I just alluded to will. And so there'll be a whole care team in this trial that has more data on your health than I think anyone else has ever had, unless you happen to be in the doctor every week or something like that. Yeah, this is probably the most insight people have on your health, and they're monitoring that, right, again, for safety and for your well-being. And so I think in a way that's an interesting kind of bonus piece here, right, is like you are going to have more experts looking at more information on how healthy you are than you probably would in any other situation just by being a participant.
That's a really good point. I mean, how often are we getting DEXA scans and ophthalmology visits and homocysteine labs? I mean, we're not getting them as often as we typically would like to. So,
I might, yeah, and Danae, actually, just quickly, a quick like anecdote to make it real. Sagar mentioned the boards at the hospitals that also review trials to make sure they agree that they're going to be safe. I mean, I know in my experience that, given my trial site is a pediatrics hospital, the board at the site I went to was concerned about the amount of blood that would be drawn from patients in the trial. And I think to me, it's just an example of the level of detail and sort of scrutiny that goes into making these safety decisions. I mean, they were talking about teaspoons of blood and, whether, 10 teaspoons per visit was too many versus 8 or something, right? My numbers are made up, but you get the point. Like the level of detail and just intense review that goes into ensuring the safety is from sort of top to bottom in these. And so I think there's just an incredible sort of multifaceted system of experts who are looking at every single piece of this trial to say, like, is it going to result in a safe situation for the patients and and help maintain their health. while they're undergoing this treatment.
Yeah, and Ben, I mean, I would like to get to back what you said at the beginning because that is what so impressed me, and about you. And I think people thinking about a trial, I mean, look at you. You participated in this trial, and you are directly responsible. You directly responsible for getting a drug to a phase three. And as I said, very few drugs make it to phase three. And if that drug goes on to help people, you will be directly responsible for progress for your community more than most doctors or physicians can ever do. And so if that's something I think that appeals to people, have that ability, obviously you get the other benefits, of course, of uh, more medical care, the experts, potentially a treatment that's very helpful. But I think, if you think about that larger picture of how important people don't understand how important participation in these trials. These treatments will never come without people participating until people say, hey, you know what? They raise their hand and say, hey, what? I want this to happen. It's not going to happen. However, on the other hand, and I've seen it happen many times, if everybody raises their hand and says, we want it to happen, it happens, right? It's all about the community coming together and advocating for what they want. So I really appreciate, admire you, Ben, for your participation, and Danae and Brittany, both of you as well, for your dedication and your advocacy for finding a treatment for homocystinuria.
I was going to say, I've said this many times in many presentations, and it's always kind of my rally cry to our community. The last approved drug for our community was in 1996. I mean, we're going on 30 years, and still patients are struggling to this day and suffering deadly consequences of homocystinuria. 30 years. And we are now in a time where we have an opportunity where we have, we're really close to stable, a drug that can provide stable homocysteine levels for patients. The the data that has come out previously has been really strong, and it's really exciting to see that. I'm very well controlled, but I think about the many others in our community who struggle day in and day out, and the conversations I hear from parents about they're worried for their teenager, for their child who's moving out, what is going to happen to them when I can't be there to supervise them. And it's exciting, but as Ira said, we need patients to enroll, to step up to the plate, because the drugs aren't going to approve themselves. They have to have patients to fill seats to show that this is needed and that it works. And we have great data right now to show that. We just need enough patients now to continue that path forward. So it's really, really exciting. I know Ben and I have been waiting a long time for something other than diet and formula, and so many others too in our community. And it's really exciting to be here at this point. Is there any last words, Ben or Sagar, before we part ways here and I end our meeting that you would like to convey to the community?
It's been a great conversation today, and I just really appreciate you bringing these topics to light, and hopefully, we have taken away some of the mystery of these clinical trials through Ben's very candid and very eloquent kind of a description of those trials, and hopefully I've provided a little bit of an overview of not only the trials, but why it's so important to participate.
Yes. Right. Anything, Ben?
No, yeah, nothing to add. I'm glad to really just kind of promote the fact that these are out there. That I think even I saw your posts promoting this session, Danae, and I think right alongside them on one of my social media feeds, I saw a post about the phase three study for pegtibatinase opening up, enrollment opening up. So, people should certainly go online and find that information and reach out to the right folks on their care team or contacts associated with the program to get involved.
Yes. And so if you're interested in learning more about, I'm going to actually stop here and thank you to our sponsor, Travere Therapeutics, for allowing us this opportunity to host this. But if you are interested in learning more about pegtibatinase and the clinical trial, you can visit hcuconnection.com. And there is a link on there to connect with a person via email or by phone and ask all those burning questions. And also definitely talk to your care team too about it as well, just because it is a lot to go into the decision-making process. And so there's definitely a path forward. It's so exciting to be able to be here. But thank you, Ben, Sagar, and Brittany, for your time this evening and for the wonderful conversation. And thank you to those who have participated in our Q&A as well and brought your time, your questions, and thank you so much to the group here for helping advance our understanding of the clinical trial process and helping demystify what it's like to participate. And so from our HCU data collection to clinical trials, new therapies start with you. And we hope you will continue to engage and ask questions and to participate in research. Thank you again for the wonderful evening. And thank you again for being here.